Joining us now to discuss the future of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood is Sahar Khamis, an expert on Arab and Muslim media and associate professor at the University of Maryland. From Cairo, Khaled Dawoud is spokesman for Egypt's Al-Dostour party, and from London, Omar Ashour is a senior lecturer in Middle East politics at the University of Exeter. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Sahar, let me start with you. Do you think the military regime in Egypt will go ahead and carry out the execution of Mohamed Morsi? He is, after all, the former leader that was democratically elected.
Absolutely. He was the first leader to be democratically elected in Egypt's history, actually. We did not have fair and transparent democratic elections, except in the case that led to Morsi taking power. And I think that it's more of a political statement, really. The whole thing about passing this kind of execution sentence for Morsi, in my opinion, is nothing more than a political statement. It is showing the stronghold of the regime, that they want to have a tight fist, that they want to show no kind of compromise, if you will, or mercy when it comes to the Brotherhood. But it's not only the first case of execution that has been passed. There have been so many execution sentences that have been passed in the Egyptian courts lately without sufficient evidence or investigation, or without the due course of legal justice being taken into account and into consideration. So in my own opinion, it is more of a show of force from the side of the regime, and it's more of making a political statement. But I don't think that when it really comes down to it, that they would carry out the execution, because I think it would be too politically loaded, and it will only create more and more heat in the Egyptian scene, and also internationally. It will have a lot of echoes, and it will have a lot of detrimental and negative effects, which I don't think the regime is ready to face or is willing to take.
Khaled, looking at developments in Egypt, does the Muslim Brotherhood have any kind of a future in the country, or is it now going to be a political organization that is going to go underground?
Well, let me start first of all by noting that I don't agree with describing the current regime in Egypt as a military regime, even if the president comes from a very much military background. I mean, of course, there is a growing role for the army in running the country. But also to state that the sentence against Mr. Morsi is mainly a political issue, I don't think it's also correct, because this is only a sentence that was issued by first-degree criminal court. There's still a very long process ahead. I mean, if you even take the case of ousted President Mubarak, he was sentenced initially to life imprisonment, and later he was freed from all the charges. And I mean, in November, he's going to start yet another leg of his very lengthy trial. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood and the current president, in my opinion, in Egypt, are actually adopting what we can say is an escalation course. The government and the security bodies, on one hand, is insisting on maintaining a very hard, heavy-handed security crackdown against the Muslim Brotherhood members and leaders. But the Muslim Brotherhood as well are not showing any signs of compromise. They're insisting on sticking to their demands, which have been widely rejected by the Egyptian people. I'm not denying at all that Mr. Morsi was elected democratically. But again, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood proved to be a major failure, because their understanding of democracy is once you reach office, you turn against all measures of democracy that allowed you to reach power in the first place. So the Egyptian people came against Mr. Morsi and insisted on his removal on June 30, and there is no chance that the Muslim Brotherhood will be able to make a comeback to power again.
Okay, let's go to Omar in London. Omar, there is a newspaper here in the United States, the Christian Science Monitor, which reports that the Muslim Brotherhood has split into two groups. There's an old guard, according to this report, which favors non-violent resistance to the military government, and then a younger group, another group, which looks at using violence against violence. Do we know how deep this division is and which side is prevailing?
It's hard to describe it as violence versus non-violence. It is much more complex than that. You have more or less two generations. One generation that has developed its political capacities and ideas during the period between 2011 and now 2015, which tends to be the younger generation. Tends to have the idea of more revolutionary change as opposed to gradualist, reformist change, and tends to have this idea that there should be more or less non-violence should be maintained, but if we have to defend ourselves, then we should pursue that. And this goes very much opposed to the older generation, which witnessed multiple confrontations with the multiple regimes in Egypt and lost that confrontation. So they are very cautious in terms of going ahead. All of them are above 65 and sometimes 70. All of them are fear the state. All of them were supportive of this idea during Mohamed Morsi time that we should be gradualist, we should be reformers, we should not be radicals, revolutionaries, we should not uphold revolutionary change. And all of them, interestingly, were not very keen on the uprising in January 2011. They were not very supportive of it. They were fearing confrontation with the Mubarak regime. So these two generations are at collision course at the moment. And the factionalism is very intense, and it has been a pattern in the history of the brothers. When you have this is probably the worst crisis ever the brothers has faced, even compared to Nasser's time, even compared to Mubarak's time.
Right.
And in any of these crises, you usually have this factionalism coming to the fore and this debate coming to the fore.
Sahar, of course, Egypt is a very diverse country when we look across the country, you know, from the major urban areas to the rural areas, etc. But if we look across the country, is there any way of measuring the kind of support that the Muslim Brotherhood has right now?
Yeah, I think that, as you said, you know, we have 90 million Egyptians, and it's very hard to put them all in the same basket or categorize them all under the same category. I think that there are still, despite all the governmental crackdown and all the, you know, hardships and turmoils that the Brotherhood, of course, has undergone lately, especially since 2013, there has been still some base of support for the Brotherhood inside and outside Egypt. And if you look at Egypt, you have to talk about which segment of the Egyptian society or the Egyptian population you are specifically talking about. Because in rural areas, in Upper Egypt, for example, they still have a lot and wide base of support. You know, a lot of the rural people and a lot of the Upper Egyptians have voted for Morsi. A lot of them are pro-Brotherhood, if you will, in the sense that they don't think what has been done to the Brotherhood and to Morsi has been fair or just. And they do have a sympathy and an empathy for the Brotherhood also because of the social role that the Muslim Brotherhood as an organization has been very good at for a long time, even when it was banned from political life and banned from political participation, it was still able to successfully offer a lot of social services, you know, subsidized products, food, you know, clothing. And when you have poor people or people who are living under economic hardships, these kinds of educational, health, and food services would, you know, earn you a lot of support. But if you're talking about some of the, you know, upper middle class Caireans, you know, those who have more of a Western leaning or more of a secular orientation, then of course they will have a different mindset. And some of them might even have a political stand which is against the Brotherhood, not so much because of their, you know, social or religious role, but because of their political stand, which they don't agree with when it comes to the domain of politics. So we have to really understand what segment and what category of the Egyptian people we are specifically talking about in this case.
Right. Khaled, does the government of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi run the risk of perhaps creating martyrs with this crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood right now?
The problem is that the Muslim Brotherhood, in my opinion, is making the wrong bet at this stage. And I have two professors with me on this show, and they can tell you that historically speaking, any political group that tries to use violence against the central government in Egypt does not get to win. I mean, unfortunately, our country has been through a lot over the past 4 years. People, or at least the majority of the people, are now very tired of the entire security situation, of the entire economic situation. And when supposedly or allegedly Muslim Brotherhood supporters go and blow up electricity grids, try to attack transportation means, kill very junior, small, police officers or soldiers who have nothing to do with the real decision-making process, they lose the sympathy of the average Egyptians. Like my colleague, Dr. Sahar, is saying, of course they have support, but I think that this support is diminishing and they're getting more and more isolated. And that's why they need also to reconsider the strategy and consider that violence against the central government at this particular point is not going to be effective at all.
Okay, I want to get your response, Sahar, very quickly, then I want to go to Omar.
Two important points here in line with what my friends here said on the show, that, you know, exactly the use of violence is something that would definitely undermine the popularity and the support of the Brotherhood, both inside and outside Egypt, which is why, as Dr. Ashour was saying earlier, there is this kind of split or division within the ranks of the Brotherhood between those who have the more conservative mindset of being a reformist in society and the younger generation who are more prone to adopt a more revolutionary or even confrontational or sometimes violent course. So I do agree with this point about non-violence being the best survival strategy for any movement, including the Brotherhood. The second point is that not everybody who is even sympathetic with the Brotherhood was necessarily very elated and excited about them running for government or running for office or nominating someone for president back, in 2012. And the reason was, number one, they said that they're not going to nominate anyone for presidency, and then they, at the last minute, decided to nominate someone for presidency. And number two, a lot of people, including myself, think they would have been in a much better position had they remained a strong opposition party, rather than really kind of running into the political race without being better prepared for it, and therefore facing all of these harsh and negative consequences.
Okay, let me go to Omar very quickly in London. Omar, does the Muslim Brotherhood still pose a major threat in Egypt? I mean, we just had a report this morning, Tuesday morning, which said that they're now going to be targeting tourist sites. These are soft sites which could seriously threaten Egypt because, tourism is a major source of income for Egypt.
I don't think that the Muslim Brothers or its members have declared, a war on tourism or on soft targets or on civilians. The main issue is that the protests that happens and gets attacked by the security services opening fire, and the worst of them was in August 2013 when the sit-in, the pro-Morsi sit-in was dispersed via killing almost 1,000 protesters in less than 10 hours in front of TV cameras all over the world. So when something like that happened, this what really made the shift happen within the organization, and more and more realization among the younger members specifically that civil resistance has its limits. And if you really want to pursue real change, then you need hard power. The period between February 2011, when the uprising succeeded in removing Mubarak or in toppling the head of the regime, till July 2013, when all the bets were off and things changed quite completely, there were three benefits: the basic freedoms, and the electoral box was clean for the first time in Egypt history, and you had the removal of the head of the regime. These three gains, many of the brothers were believing that they cannot be maintained unless you have hard power. But now we have a political crisis, unprecedented again in Egypt history. You have a serious division within the Egyptian society. In one building, you will have the one side that is cheering for Sisi and for what happened in July, and you will have in the same building the man whose daughter was killed, 16 years old, in one of the protests.
Okay, we are going to have to take a break right now. More on the political future of Egypt, plus what the potential decline of the Muslim Brotherhood means for the region. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat.